A very warm welcome to the signature event of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, to all of you who are here and to all of you who are joining online. So the Royal Society of Edinburgh is Scotland's National Academy. It has about 1,800 fellows who are experts from all walks of life, as well as a substantial administrative staff. So my name is John Ball. I'm the president of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and I'm a mathematician. I hope you all like mathematics. No, yes? Well, anyway, mathematics is one of many subjects which are incredibly important for understanding the climate, and it's the climate that is the subject of our event today. And we're extremely honored to have Vanessa Nakate, who is a climate justice activist from Uganda, to talk to us. I first encountered Vanessa at COP26 when she gave a really inspiring address to the conference, which I was there, and I recorded it on my mobile phone, and I sometimes show it to people. It's really a remarkable speech, and I encourage you, you can find it online, of course. So Vanessa is one of a number of people who are playing an incredibly important role in challenging governments and industry and society at large to take the many issues, many of them complex, concerning climate change seriously. And this is, of course, important for all of us. It's particularly important for you as young people and, of course, for future generations. So the event will take the form of a conversation, which will be co-chaired by Louise MacDonald, who is one of the fellows of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. She's Director General for the Economy of the Scottish Government, and Molly McGoran, who's Vice Chair of the Scottish Youth Parliament. So can we give a very warm welcome to Vanessa and us?
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, and hi, everybody. So as I said, I'm Louise, and along with Molly, we're going to be welcoming Vanessa and steering us through this conversation as well this afternoon. So great to see you all, delighted to have you here. I think, and I'm fortunate, I've had a conversation with Vanessa before, and I've never failed to be inspired when I've spoken to you and heard you as well. Vanessa also, it's worth knowing that she was named as one of the BBC's 100 Women of the Year. And also Time magazine, the 100 most influential young Africans as well. So you're in the presence of someone who's been doing amazing things all the way through since you were a teenager and into where you are now. So incredible to have Vanessa with us as well. So, but I'm going to be steering us alongside Molly. So Molly, I don't know if you want to say hello.
Yeah, I just wanted to say an extra welcome to the people that are in the room and also those who are joining us online as well. It's nice to have such a diverse range of people coming with us. So just want to jump straight back into the questions like Louise touched on. So Vanessa, I was wondering if you could take us back to the beginning of your activism. Where was it and how did you get involved originally?
Yeah, thank you very much. I started, my journey of activism started in 2018 when I started to do research about some of the challenges that were affecting the people in my country, Uganda. And when I found out that climate change was one of those challenges, I was very surprised because in school, we do learn about climate change in a way, for example, in geography class, but then what we learn doesn't carry the urgency of the problem and doesn't really explain how people are suffering. And when I, found out about these impacts, they related to some of the things that I was already seeing in Uganda, like, flooding and landslides and the droughts. And that, really, really made me want to do something about what was happening. And in that period of time, there was, an incredible young person who was striking, in front of the Swedish Parliament, that is Greta Thunberg. And when I saw what Greta was doing, I was really inspired by her to also start organizing, the climate strikes in Uganda. So that is how I started striking, every Friday. Though my very first climate strike was actually on a Sunday. because when I, decided that I would do the climate strikes, it was quite very scary for me, and I was very nervous to do that because, I grew up as someone who wasn't very confident and someone who was referred to as, very shy and very introverted. So it was very hard to step out and hold the climate, the placards and go on the street. But then it was this one evening on Saturday, and I kept seeing the climate strikes and, the students from different parts of the world, and I was really I was very inspired by what they were doing, but then I couldn't gather the strength to do it myself. But that evening, I decided that I would start striking, actually start striking. And when, I realized that Friday was already past because it was a Saturday, and because I felt there was this urgency, I decided to do the strike the following day and then follow up with the rest of the, activists who were striking every Friday.
Nice. So to touch on that a little bit more, how do you think that being a climate activist has changed since you first got involved, either for yourself and your own experiences or for others as well?
Well, speaking for myself and some of the changes that I have seen, in activism, there has been, of course, a lot. When I started activism, I had my own plan of, doing it for 7 months and then continue with, school, with, and continue with school and probably do a master's and all that. So I had a plan to do it for a specific period of time. But then, as the months went by, I just found myself continuing because it's very hard to stop when, you see the problem is still there. It's very hard to stop when you see that people are, really being impacted and people are losing their livelihoods because of climate disasters. So I kind of just kept going, and I'm still doing it up to now. And I think what I can say that has really changed for me personally was that in school, I couldn't, it was always very hard for me to even give a presentation in front of a class. So for me to be able to do this, and speak to different people, to speak in front of, these students, to me, I think that's something that has changed for me personally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Because now, you've spoken at the UN?
Yeah.
You've spoken at the UN. It's quite a change, isn't it, from going from classroom presentation to the UN. That's amazing. And in terms of that change from when you started striking and others, other young people across the world doing the school strikes on Fridays, it's been a few years now that's been kind of happening. What's the kind of biggest change that you think you've seen? When you think back to when you first started doing it and you think back to where we are and you think where we are now, what are the things that you think about have really changed, and where do you think you've seen impact, and where are the things that have made you feel frustrated or haven't changed fast enough?
Yeah, when it comes to impact, what I've seen, there's been a lot of awareness that has been created in the world. Since, the climate strikes, since when Greta started the climate strikes in 2018, because she started by herself. But, along the way, 2019, 2020, even during the pandemic, activists continued to organize online. So I think there's really been a huge, awareness creation around the world. And I think there's been people asking questions about what they can do. I think that's very impactful. People asking questions about, what they can do in their jobs to address the climate crisis. We've had, lawyers ask questions, teachers ask questions. So, everyone wants to do something about what is happening, which I think is, very, impactful in a very positive way. Because when we create this awareness, and different people get to know about what is happening, then everyone wants to do something about it, which is really good. I think the frustrations that come with activism, of course, you constantly have, these demands of what needs to be done, and then you don't see that happen, as fast as it should, because with more delays, more people suffer. With more delays, more families are impacted. So I think really the frustrations come from, the governments and the leadership. But when it comes to people, there is a lot of awareness that has been created. There is a lot of change that is happening in communities through grassroots projects that are being carried out by different young people. So, I mean, that is the positive side of it.
Yeah, and actually I wanted to pick up that point, because I think, we're not seeing things change fast enough, are we? It's just not happening fast enough, and we know, we see every day the impact that it has in communities across the world. So there's a bit around, you feel frustration around that, but also we hear young people talk about this. I know the Scottish Youth Parliament and work that they've done have heard of this from young people, about a real concern about what's called climate anxiety, but feeling really, actually scared about what's happening in the world. But also for lots of young people, a bit of a sense of what can we do about it? I'm not in a position of power. How do I kind of get involved? But that real anxious feeling about it, and that kind of feeling quite scared, but also that sense of how do I make a difference? I mean, do you ever feel that, and what would be, what would you say to young people who may be feeling that?
Yeah, I've experienced some moments of, the frustration and the anxieties. And I mostly experienced that when, I had just started, because when you've just started and it's your first time, I think you kind of feel like changes will come very quickly. Mm-hmm. So in the time when I just started, I think a few months into my activism, I started to feel, really frustrated. I started to feel really tired, because, you have to keep doing these strikes, but then you're feeling like, but these people are not doing anything. The leaders are not listening to us. So those were, my very earliest moments of feeling, all this anxiety and frustration and, disappointment from the governments and the decisions that they were making. And, going through that made me actually stop doing activism for some time, because I didn't have, the strength to continue. I just didn't know how to continue when, the leaders are not doing the right thing. But then I remember speaking with a friend who really, advised me not to give up and, to keep doing what I was doing and to believe that what I'm doing is important. But above all, to realize that I'm not doing it by myself, mm-hmm. and that there are, different young people across the world who are thinking the same way, who are organizing in their communities. So for me, from that moment, that feeling of not being alone and, feeling like I was part of a global climate movement, I think it was very, very important for me. But many young people experience this, anxiety. For me, it really came from that inaction, the frustration of the disasters continuing, and then, that whole pressure of everyone saying, the future is in the hands of young people. Mm-hmm. Even that brings anxiety for so many young people to feel like they have to fix, the planet, they have to fix the present, they have to, fix the future. So I think it's really important for, the older generation to know that young people can do this by themselves, and young people are not experts. Young people want to live, want to, to be able to live through their childhood, to be able to live through their youthful years. But then, all that is being taken up by, this whole responsibility of taking care of the planet, of ensuring that we have a future. So I think that, the older people really need to understand that young people can't do this alone. We have to do it together. I believe that will help reduce on the anxiety, because sometimes the anxiety comes from, that constant saying of young people are inspiring, young people are going to change the world, young people are experts at this. So it's really about understanding that, the different young people around the world, they just want to have a present and they want to have a future. So how can we all work together to ensure that that happens, instead of putting all this huge responsibility on just the young people? So I think those are the places where I've seen anxiety. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, it's huge, and I just think that there's something, isn't there, about that? Everyone wants to have a sense of hope. Everyone's looking for where's the hope in this when it feels difficult, and it is quite easy, I think, for adults to look to young people for that hope. But you're absolutely right. It has to be something that we do as a community, and we do it together as well. One more question from me, Vanessa, is just thinking about the next, 5 to 8 years, right? Let's not do this whole kind of, 20, 30 years away, because we don't really have that much time, really, do we? So the next sort of 5 to 8 years, maybe, we put you in charge of all of it, right? We're going to put you in charge of everything, okay? Just for a minute. But what do you think are the priorities? What are the things that really need to change if we're really going to make this difference? And not so much at that individual activist level, but what does the world need to wake up to, and what needs to happen in the next 5 to 8 years?
Well, I'll start by saying recently, I made a visit to Ghana, a region in the Horn of Africa that is experiencing the worst drought that it has seen in 40 years. And I got to meet mothers and children that are suffering from severe acute malnutrition. And, to think about 5 or 8 years, I think that is a lot of time. It's about what we need to do right now, not what we need to do in 5 years, because, a child who is starving doesn't have 5 years, or, a mother who is struggling to look for water or to look for food doesn't have 8 years. I think it's about what we need to do right now. And for me, I think what we really need to do right now is to make decisions that ensure that those on the front lines are protected, ensure that those on the front lines have access to, basic needs of life like water, health facilities, access to food, access to a home. And we know that the climate crisis is impacting all of this. So to go to the root cause of the problem, even as we address the immediate needs of bringing food or water to communities, but something that will be sustainable, something that won't be short term. We need to, put an end to all new fossil fuel infrastructure. We need to tackle the root cause of the climate crisis and stop emissions from rising. We need to ensure just transition to renewable energy, keeping in mind, communities that are experiencing energy poverty right now. Many of those communities are in the global south. So it's really about what we can do right now, addressing the root causes of the climate crisis, as well as helping people right now that are suffering.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that we always say at the Youth Parliament. We have a lovely phrase that is, young people are the future of climate, but they're also the here and now, which I think is very akin to what you've just touched on. And also to go back to one of your previous points that you started at the top of that question, about how life in Uganda and how it compares to life in Scotland, because I feel like we're all very privileged in here, and we'd love to hear more about your experiences and how climate activism looks different in those two different parts of the world.
Well, yeah. Well, when you get in Scotland, you can definitely tell there is a difference, and people are living in different parts of the world, or in different kinds of realms, if I should say. And when it comes to the climate impacts, they are already visible in countries like Uganda, or in countries across Africa or across the global south. And it's a crisis that is happening right now that needs to be addressed right now. But when you come to these places or countries like Scotland, many times people will talk about that maybe today they experienced extra heat, or there is really a difference in how people are being impacted by the climate crisis. And that's why it's important to understand we may be facing the same storm, but we are in different boats. And climate change is disproportionately affecting so many communities. One's problem here may be maybe the winter is more cold, but another one's problem is I need food today. I need to be able to access, to get a plate of food today so that I can live through the day, so that I can live through the week. So, the differences are very clear that it is the same storm, but it is different boats. That's why there is really a need to address how climate change disproportionately affects communities. There is a need to address how communities that are on the front lines need to be on the front pages. They need to be at the front lines of climate conversations, at the front lines of solutions. That they need to make their communities better and to ensure that the communities have livelihoods that they can hold on to. So of course the differences are very clear. And what I always tell fellow activists or friends, for example, in the global north, is to first of all acknowledge the privilege that you have, to acknowledge that the climate crisis is not impacting us the same way, and use that privilege to help those on the front lines, because many times people find it hard to acknowledge that they are privileged. But acknowledging privilege is a first step to doing something about the challenges that people are going through. And when you acknowledge that privilege, then you use that privilege to help those on the front lines, to support the communities that are suffering right now.
Mm-hmm. So I know you've touched on it a bit in that answer there, which makes my follow-up question a little bit useless. But if you could share one word of advice with young climate activists in Scotland, which we've got a lot of in the room, what would it be and why?
Well, young people are always being given advice, and I think that young people already know, the fact that you've said that some activists here, I don't think they really need advice, because they've already seen a problem and they're doing something about it. Maybe what I can just say is, something that Greta said before, no one is too small to make a difference.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And tell us, you've also, in terms of the work that you've been doing in Uganda, you've also been doing your own, as well as a kind of a world stage in the work that you've been doing as an activist across the world. You've also been working on projects with schools in Uganda as well, is that right? Can you tell us a bit about that, Vanessa?
Yeah, so in schools in Uganda, we do carry out climate education to reach out to the different students and help them, understand what is really happening and what they can do about it, because for many students, they may not know what is really happening. They may not know what could impact their food, or what is destroying their parents' farms or something like that. So it's really helpful to kind of go through this education with them and help them understand what's happening, but also help them understand what can be done to address the issue. And when it comes to projects, I started a project for installing solar panels and eco-friendly cook stoves in schools in Uganda. It's called the Vash Green Schools Project. Mm-hmm. And I started it to really help drive a transition to renewable energy in schools in Uganda, especially those in the rural communities, and also, to enable schools have access to clean cooking. So most of the schools in Uganda use firewood for food preparation, but with the eco-friendly cook stoves, they're able to reduce that consumption. And with the solar panels, they're able to access electricity in a more cleaner and sustainable way. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've seen that project has made an absolutely huge difference. I was stalking you before this, so.
See it online. And can you tell us a little bit about, I suppose I'm also thinking about the way that climate impacts and the impacts of climate change impacts on different groups and communities, and there's a lot of discussion about the kind of the disproportionate impact on girls and young women, and how do we kind of support more kind of girls and young women in that space. I mean, you'll have seen a lot of that firsthand, I'm sure, but I mean, is there anything in there that you think we need to do more of, or you know, action that we need to kind of take to support that, to support more support for development for girls and young women?
Yeah, so climate change disproportionately affects women and girls in different parts of the world, especially in the global south. And I got to learn about this, I think in 2019, because I was, you know, reading a lot and getting to understand climate change and getting to understand how it impacts people. And I got to learn that in some communities that, you know, on the front lines of this crisis, when they experience these disasters, for example, they lose their farms or they lose their businesses, many of them are forced to remove some of their children from school. And many times there is always a priority about who stays in school. And many times it's the girls who drop out of school, and in even worse cases, they are given up for marriage with expectation of a bride price to help their families recover from, you know, these impacts of the climate crisis. And that is really the first time that I got to understand how, you know, climate change affects education of so many girls across the global south, and how it's also exacerbating child marriages in these communities. So there is really a need to have, you know, the conversation of, you know, climate and girls, you know, and women, because it's, you know, it's all connected. So one of the things that I've also learned through, you know, activism is that girls' education and women empowerment, you know, can help us in tackling the climate crisis. And I learned this through Project Drawdown, which lists 100 things that we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And most often ranked among the top 10, you know, solutions is education. And it really goes on to explain how, you know, education and women empowerment can help reduce inequalities that women and girls are already facing, can help build resilience of individuals, which is passed to their families and their communities. And it can also help, you know, have more women in the rooms where, you know, conversations about our planet are being made. You know, so it's really, you know, one of those solutions that we need to talk a lot about, that, you know, the fight for climate justice is not just a fight to, you know, reduce emissions. It's also a fight to ensure that girls stay in school and women are empowered, and, you know, communities are preserved and generations can be able to access resources, you know, hundreds of years from now. So it's really understanding how, you know, climate change is more than weather and data points, but it's really about the people.
Mm-hmm. We're going to come to some questions that have come from schools as well in the room and online in a moment. But if I can, Vanessa, I'm thinking about coming back to what you said earlier about, you know, this was quite a scary thing for you to do, to start the climate strike yourself in your local community, and to then move into that climate activism. You're now talking on stages at the UN and at COP and these sorts of things. What's it like when you're standing there ready to step on stage? What is it like for you to be in those spaces? Tell us a bit about that and your experiences there, but also how do you kind of do that, take the breath and then step up to the microphone, as it were? What's it been like being in those kind of spaces?
I mean, it's very hard for me to explain how I am able to do it, because, when you ask some of my friends or people I've gone to school with, they'll say that, we are completely different people. The person that they saw in class and the person that they see speaking, they are completely two different people. So that is it's very hard for me to explain how I am able to do it. But there are always, moments where you feel nervous before, going to the stage and speaking. But then when I start to speak, it starts becoming easier for me and more comfortable for me as, I continue to engage with the people. But how I do it, I really have no explanation. Yeah.
It's definitely easier to speak when you're truly passionate about what you're speaking about. I feel like it just kind of flows naturally when you're so dedicated to the cause. Yeah. And after you've done all of these amazing achievements, I know this might be a bit into the future, but what do you think are your next steps for you?
Well, I think that I would like to reach more schools in Uganda with the schools project and get more schools powered with solar energy, and also have more schools access clean cooking. Yeah.
Can you explain the clean cooking bit a bit more? Because to be honest, for young people in Scotland, they probably don't understand why that is such an important issue. Would it be okay to explain that a bit more?
Yes. So the schools that, for example, we've worked on, they have for example, they have kitchens. You can imagine a structure of a kitchen outside, but then they prepare food on open fires. When I say open fires, it's they use, for example, 3 stones to kind of direct the firewood. So that's how most of the preparation is for the schools, especially in the rural areas. So one thing with the open fires is that they use, a lot of firewood to do the preparation, and also there is a lot of air pollution, especially for the person who prepares the food. And again, most of the times when we go to the schools, the people who prepare the food are women. So they're really exposed to this indoor pollution from the open fires. Now, with the eco-friendly cook stove, it is constructed in the kitchen, at the school. And what it does, the way it reduces the firewood consumption is that it keeps heat, within its structure. So you find that, if they put 1 or 2 or 3 firewood in the morning, that heat can stay the whole time or the whole day. So it can be able to prepare the food and warm the food so they don't have to use more firewood. And it also really reduces the pollution within the kitchen. So before, you would go in the kitchen and ask yourself how, the people who prepare the food are able to stay in there for even more than 5 minutes because of how, polluted it is. And, you enter and you start coughing because of all the smoke and that. But then with the stove, it just takes away all that, and it just keeps the heat within the structure, so that heat kind of prepares the food for the rest of the day and warms it, so they don't have to use more firewood.
Yeah, it's a great example of how climate and health are really linked together as well, doesn't it, in terms of using wood. That's so interesting. Okay, well, we really want to see all of that growing, so I hope that's something you can continue to grow. We've got some questions from in the room, so Molly, will we move on to those? Is that okay with you? So I've got the first one, Balerno High School. Where are you? Hello, how are you? You all right? Good. So good to see you. The question from Balerno is, where in the world are you particularly worried about right now?
Where in the world?
Where in the world? Yeah, which part of the world?
Well, I think I would say that I'm just worried for the communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. And it's not just Uganda, it's not just countries within Africa, it's also, across the global south. You've probably heard, what happened in Pakistan and the flooding that left over 33 million people impacted, and thousands more dead as a result of the flooding. So it's really those communities that are suffering right now as a result of the crisis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Our second question is also from Balerno High School. So
You did well, Balerno, didn't you?
Yeah, written a lot of questions. So it is, what actions should our government be taking in reference to the Scottish Government?
Yeah, just the Scottish Government or like governments in general?
You could do both.
Do both, so touch on Scotland first.
Well, for governments, the asks are all the same. No new fossil fuel infrastructure, a just transition to renewable energy, and also the issue of climate finance for mitigation, for adaptation, and also, a facility for loss and damage that is already happening, in the communities on the front lines.
And could you say a bit more about that loss and damage? Because I think if you're quite close to the issue, you'll understand what some of that kind of means. But for others, that's maybe a kind of a new idea. So could you maybe expand for us what that's about?
Yeah, when I was trying to understand what loss and damage was, I remember watching a video of a fellow activist, Ineza from Rwanda, and she was explaining how she grew up in this home, and then one day they lost the home as a result of flooding and they had to move. And to her, that was loss and damage. She couldn't get her home back. She couldn't get, the place that she had all those childhood memories back. So that is, the easiest way I can explain, loss and damage, that people lose things that they cannot get back as a result of the impacts of the climate crisis. When we talk about adaptation helps communities build resilience as these disasters occur. But with the rate at which the climate crisis is impacting communities, it is pushing them beyond adaptation. So that is where loss and damage comes in, I always say you can't adapt to the loss of your culture. You can't adapt to the loss of your home, a place you used to call home. So this is where, loss and damage comes in. And that's why there is really a need to have money to support those that are experiencing or suffering from loss and damage.
And Scotland's helped with that already, is that right? Has the Scottish Government helped with that?
Yeah, the First Minister made, a pledge to support those that are suffering from loss and damage. I think that was made last year at COP26.
Which of course is right, because those that are the most affected by climate contribute the least to it. So it's the bare minimum of what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. And now I've got a question from James Gillespie High, who I think are online. So I'm assuming a big cheer for wherever James Gillespie pupils are gathered, but good to see you. And I think you've maybe touched on some of this before, Vanessa, but this gives you a bit of a chance to think about it in one sort of sense. And I was really taken with your comment about we may all be in one storm, but we're not in the same boat. Is a really powerful idea. But what does climate justice look like to you? Tell us a bit more about what that, it's easy to say, what does it actually mean for you, and how would we know it when we see it?
Yeah, I think, when we talk about climate justice, we have to, first of all, understand, what the climate crisis itself is, and the inequalities or the horrible realities of the climate crisis, and how those that are being impacted the most are not responsible for the crisis. For example, the African continent historically is responsible for less than 4% of the global emissions, but we are seeing some of the worst impacts affect African countries. So it's really, first of all, understanding, who is historically responsible for this crisis, to see who is suffering as a result of a crisis that they didn't create, and ensuring that climate justice doesn't leave those communities behind. So climate justice, the same way as, climate change is more than statistics and it's about the people, it goes on with climate justice. For me, climate justice has to have community, it has to have the heart of people in the conversation, that even when you're talking about having a solar powered infrastructure in a community, that having that infrastructure there, that solution has to be led by the people in that community. They must agree with it. They must work together with communities to ensure that these solutions are implemented. So I can say that not all climate action will be climate justice, but all climate justice, will be climate action. So justice is really bringing the people in the conversations of, what needs to be done to address the crisis.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Yeah. I think that's quite a few of the questions answered from us, but I was wondering if there was anything else that you wanted to add at all. No pressure, but just anything you might miss.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I always wonder, Vanessa, because you must be being interviewed a lot, right? You get a lot of this. Lots of people asking you lots of questions. Is there anything that you kind of wish that people would ask you that you never get asked? Is there anything that you think, I wish that somebody would ask me that question, or that I could talk about a particular thing?
Well, it's hard to think about right now. Yeah.
And what, in terms of individuals, clearly a lot of the responsibility in terms of tackling the climate crisis rests with organisations, with business, with government and so on. So it's important that we don't just kind of say this is about, it's all just down to single kind of behaviours. But it's part of the picture, isn't it? That we all kind of think about how we change our lifestyles and think about the things that we're kind of doing. What are the kind of things that you would hope that more people would do at that level as well?
Well, I think that I'll start from governments and systems. I think governments have a responsibility to make, cities or their countries sustainable, because many times people find themselves in systems that don't allow them to live as sustainably as they want to. So there is really a huge responsibility to make cities or to make, countries as sustainable as possible. And it can be through transportation, it can be through, the clothes we wear or what we eat, but it all starts from the government and making these, making sustainability accessible for the people. I remember just a few months back, I remember saying to, a friend of mine that I wish we had, this kind of, public transportation. And I said, if, I had all the money in the world, I would ensure that, there is all this public transportation in, countries like Uganda or countries across Africa, because it kind of, erases the needs for things like cars or that. But when it's not available in cities, then it makes it hard for people to, live sustainably, for example, in terms of transportation. But if public transportation is made accessible and even affordable for people, I think that can really help people, live sustainably. So it really goes back to what has been put in place for the people in those countries and whether it allows them to live as sustainable as they want. And when it comes to what people can do, you just decide what you can do. You know what you can do, so you decide what you can do. I don't really think it's my place to tell people to do this and to do that. I think it's my place to tell governments what they need to do. But for individuals, I don't think it's my place to do that. I think you just find what you feel you can do to contribute to a fight for climate justice, and just be an activist in the way that you can.
Yeah, that's great advice. And actually that point about public transport is a really interesting one, because actually, Molly, we were
just talking earlier about, thanks to the campaigning of a number of organisations in Scotland, including the Youth Parliament, there is free bus travel for under 22s in Scotland, which was introduced earlier this year. So it's one of the things that, and as part of that, some of that has been about supporting young people to access opportunities and so on, but part of it also is to encourage more engagement with public transport and to kind of think about that. So it's an interesting point. What's your, maybe pride isn't the word, Vanessa, but when you're looking back at some of the work that you've done, what are the kind of things that you look at and think, that's a moment that I treasure, or that's a moment that I kind of feel I can look back in my experience and think, yeah, I've something good has happened there.
Well, I think the moment one of the moments I really treasure was the moment when I started doing the climate strikes, because I was scared to do them at first, but that very first time when I did it, I'm always proud of that moment. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Molly, any other questions from you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Question down.
Yeah, I think we are. So listen, everybody, thank you. A huge thanks to Vanessa. Really excellent for us to get the chance to talk to you, and thanks to those online and in the room as well. So really, it's been a real privilege for us to be part of that. And I am now going to hand over to Jeremy Smith to say just a few words of thanks. So Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed for what was a really inspiring conversation, Vanessa. That was wonderful. There were two things, lots of things I got out of your conversation, but there's two things I'll pick up in particular. The first of them was the interconnectedness of things, isn't it? How everything, it's an old cliche that everything is connected to everything else, but I think the thing that comes across so strongly is how climate and health and culture and individual behaviours and all of those things, I can think of lots more, are all connected. And I think that connectedness is one of the things that comes out of it. And the other little note I made from your conversation, which really impressed me so much, was when you said, no one is too small to make a difference. And I thought that was rather not only a lovely thing to say, but I think it's quite an inspirational thing to say. I think that's something a lot of people in this room could take away from this event. Sometimes you do feel a bit small and tiny. I know I do quite a lot of the time. I'm just bluffing at the moment. But what I think is a really important thing to bear in mind is that you people, particularly, are in a position to make that difference and to show it, however you may feel at the moment that you're not. So thank you again very much indeed, and thank you, Molly, and thank you, Louise. It's been a privilege to be here and to listen to you. I've got a few other thanks to say, and then there's a bit of housekeeping. So I'm going to go through those little items. I've been given my list, so I will do that. But first of all, a big thank you to all the schools who are here, who attended in person. And let's see if we can get some hand-ups for that. The first lot I've got is Castlebrae Community Campus. Hooray! There you go, here for Castlebrae. Secondly, we heard already that Balerno was strong on the questions, but where's Balerno? Hello, Balerno. Hello, there you go. Then we've got Stuart Melville. Stuart Melville, yeah, there you go. There you go, cheering from the back row. Christon High School. Christon, are you here? Alas, maybe they're not. Maybe they're stuck somewhere travelling here. Royal High School. Yay, there you go. Who else have we got? St George's School. So, yes, there you go. And Portobello High School. Oh gosh, a good sound run from Portobello High School. That's wonderful to see you. But we also have some people who are engaging with us online using one of these things that we didn't really know about until about 2 or 3 years ago, but suddenly we do, which is Microsoft Teams. So out there on Teams we have James Gillespie, so I'll wave at them. Hello, James Gillespie. We've got Holyrood High. There we go. Ross Hall Academy. Yes, they're there somewhere out there in the ether. Shawlands Academy, Berwickshire High School. I passed Berwickshire High School on the way here today. That was nice. St Margaret's High School, Drummond Community High School, and Wallace Hall Academy. So big thumbs up to all those people who are out there somewhere in these tubes somewhere. So there we go, magic. So thank you so much for coming, everybody. It's been great to see you here. Thank you again so much to Vanessa and the team for what is a really inspirational conversation. Thank you again.